Good evening, everyone. My name is Kali Cawthon-Freels. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a premium tutor here at Applerouth. And I am excited to get to spend this evening with you talking about some of my favorite things in the entire world related to growing as a writer. So, super excited to spend this evening with you. As folks are coming on in, I just want to give you a quick idea of where we are going this evening. As you can see, we have a jam-packed hour ahead of us. And the goal is that this is not an overwhelming hour, but it's a time where you get a lot of tools and resources to use to grow as a writer, and also to maybe debunk some myths that we have about what it means to grow as a writer, what use writing is to us in this day and age, and all of that good stuff. And then as time allows, there will be time for Q&A at the end. So if you have some questions, just hold on to those to the end and we'll work through those as we can. So let's go ahead and get into it. First, I just want to highlight again, this is an event put on by Applerouth, and I just want to talk a little bit about the company. I've worked at Applerouth for nearly 11 years now as a tutor. And one of the things that I appreciate the most about what Applerouth does with tutoring is it's a very student-centered approach. We believe very deeply that when you change student self-beliefs, you can change their lives. We believe very much in the idea of, good psychology and cognition and whatnot. And what we believe about ourselves impacts what we think we're capable of. If we don't think we're capable of something, why would we try to do that thing? It becomes like this self-fulfilling prophecy, and we end up setting ourselves up for disappointment because we talk ourselves into not trying at all. So at Applerouth, we really try to help students understand their own equippedness, if that's a word, their own capabilities and the talents that you naturally have, and talk through what does it mean to adjust your natural talents to help you in this place where maybe you're struggling a little bit. So that becomes a place where you feel more confident. So there are a couple of places where we do that. Part of that is academic tutoring, which is very much what tonight's event is centered on. We provide support for students K through 12, even into college, on a wide variety of subjects. So if you just need a little bit of support with, say, your calculus class or something like that, we've got folks here who can absolutely help provide that support and confidence boost there. We also help with things like AP tutoring and stuff like that. Our second category where we help students with that is test prep, very much like SAT, ACT, college admissions type stuff. But there are lots of tests that we help students with outside of that. So if you're looking at private school admissions, so like the SSAT or the ISEE, or if you're in New York and you're applying to the privatized high schools there, the Shazat, or not the privatized high schools there, sorry, the public high schools for the Shazat, and the GRE, even if you're looking at grad school. So lots of options there that we help folks with. And then executive function coaching. Our founder, Jed Applerouth, calls executive functioning kind of like the invisible syllabus of school. So the things that come super intuitively to some students, but not very intuitively for others, like building an organizational plan so you know where all of your assignments are. That might seem like a really no-duh thing to some students, but for other students, that can be a really overwhelming task. Or figuring out how to prioritize your assignments if you've got multiple assignments due in 1 week, but then one big paper at the end of the month, right? Like, how do you juggle all of that so that way you're not shoving that big paper off to the very end, right? And all of a sudden you've got to write 5 pages in one night. That's not a fun time. So executive function coaching is about helping students develop those skills so that they can live a life that's more balanced and measured, so you have time to do the things that you enjoy, not just the school stuff. So these are the areas where we really support students and try to help them change those self-beliefs so that they believe that they're capable of succeeding in those areas. And if that's anything that you're interested in, we would certainly love to connect with you about that later. But for this evening, let's get into some writing talk. All right. So first thing I want to highlight here with writing is the AI question. I know that for me, a lot of my students and a lot of the parents of students that I've worked with ask, what's going on with AI, particularly with chat GPT. Is AI going to make cheating that much more easy and accessible for students, right? So basically, is Chat GPT this monster that we have to worry about in the academic realm? And I want to do like a little literary plug here. I intentionally chose a picture of Frankenstein's monster here because maybe AI or Chat GPT is a bit misunderstood, just like Frankenstein's monster was. So let's get into it. So the main fear with Chat GPT and AI is that it's the ultimate cheat, right? So I made my account. I asked Chat GPT to write a 5 paragraph essay on the role of women in the American Revolution. And so, in probably between 7 to 10 seconds, this is what Chat GPT came up with. It gave me a full 5 paragraph essay with a title um, and spat it out very quickly. Mission accomplished. But if you read through it, it's pretty generalized. I could only fit part of the essay that I provided on the screen here, but it's super generalized. There aren't any like actual names of people. There aren't specific events that it's talking about. There are no sources cited, right? Like in terms of the level of quality of this essay, I mean, it's not great. Like maybe mid-ish, like if it's okay for me to say something like that. It's not stellar, is what I'm going to say. It's definitely legible. You can get that, in this sense, the AI is saying that the women are the unsung heroes of the American Revolution. But I'm not confident that this would get high marks, particularly if you're in a competitive class like AP US history or something like that. I don't think that this would get graded well at all, right? So if you were to use this to try and game your essays at school, I'm pretty sure that your teacher would pick up on it, right? So I'd like, is it the ultimate cheat? Uh, Not ultimate is how I would categorize that. But I don't think that means we need to avoid Chat GPT altogether in the classroom, right? I think that Chat GPT could be game changing for some students if we adapt how we use it. So instead of asking Chat GPT to just throw out a full essay like that, there are some ways that we could maybe use it in the brainstorming process, right? So let's say that this is the essay prompt that your history teacher gave you. Write an essay on an often overlooked part of the American Revolution. So that is a pretty broad topic, right? Like you could go pretty much anywhere with that. And for some students, that's really energizing and invigorating. I get to write whatever I want about this. Amazing. And they have the drive and the direction to go research and figure out what they want to do. For some other students, though, that might feel like getting left abandoned in the forest with no map, right? It's all of a sudden you could go anywhere, but you don't know where to go, so you don't go anywhere. You just stay put, right? And that can be a really overwhelming feeling for a student who maybe needs some more guardrails. So I think if we are smart about it, we can really use Chat GPT to help us in that brainstorming process. So I asked it to provide to me some overlooked details of the American Revolution, and it gave me, I think, like 5 different ideas that I could look at. And so it gave me like the main ideas there in bold, a couple of sentences describing how it's overlooked, and then gave me some names of people that I could go read up on myself, right? And so obviously at that point, I would be doing the reading up on those people. I would be finding the sources. I would be putting the ideas together and like really fleshing out my own topic, right? But now I've just got a little bit more of a direction. So I think it's going to be interesting how we see the use of AI evolve over the next several years. But I don't think it's absolutely this terrible thing that we should never, ever, ever use. Um, I think it could be something that could be really helpful to some students. So as with any adaptation in technology, there are going to be pros and cons to weigh, but this is nothing new to those of us in the academic sphere, right? So this might be dating myself a little bit, but when I was in high school, graphing calculators were just becoming something that were accessible in every classroom, okay? And I grew up in the generation of people who were our math teachers told us we had to memorize everything because we weren't going to be walking around with calculators in our pockets when we grew up. To which, I hold up my smartphone as I laugh at my old teachers, right? Because we all have calculators in our pockets wherever we go now. Um, and so as that technology has evolved and is more accessible to more people, suddenly the trends in how we use calculators has shifted, right? Like if you're looking at doing SAT or PSAT work, they include the Desmos graphing calculator in the app that you use to take the SAT now, because it's all digital. And so much of the work that I do with my SAT students is, yeah, sure, we're still like talking about certain math concepts and formulas and things we have to memorize like that. But just as much of our time is spent talking about how do you use a graphing calculator, and how do we maximize this to make sure that your scores get where you want them to go. So it's just as much testing their ability to use that resource as it is their ability to regurgitate different math formulas. So I think that's kind of what we're going to see happen with Chat GPT, because there are certain things you have to know how to do in order to use that technology. You have to know what prompts to give it, what things to ask it to make it work for you. And so I imagine that, of course, with Chat GPT and graphing calculators here, it's not an apples to apples comparison, right? These are not exactly identical things. But I think that gives us kind of a sense of what could happen and how we could see this really helping students in the classroom. Um, so that's just something to throw out there. But even with Chat GPT and other things that are coming around, um, I have students who are just like, well, why does writing matter? Right? Why should I care about it? Why should I care about growing as a writer, especially in an age where we do have things like Chat GPT, even if it's not stellar, right? When we do have things like Grammarly to help with grammar, why do I need to care about grammar rules? And why do I need to care about brainstorming and all of that? And I'm going to give you two big reasons. So first, it's a skill for success, right? Like thinking long term, looking at any jobs that you might be interested in. There are few jobs where you will do zero writing whatsoever. A lot of places, if you're doing like business or corporate world, ask for a writing sample if you're going to be expected to be writing a lot of emails or copy that gets sent out to clients, and all kinds of other jobs. It's a key skill to be successful in many career fields. Um, that said, a lot of times when we get particularly to high school, the emphasis on what happens in our English classes shifts a little bit. Up until about middle school, we're like refreshing those grammar rules, talking about why we can do certain things in a sentence and why we can't do other things in a sentence and whatnot, how to break up paragraph structure and things like that. But once we get to high school, things kind of shift. And the majority of the focus is on exposing students to good literature and helping them learn how to think critically about it, which is an incredibly important skill, right? Like an incredibly important skill. It's just one of those things where there were so many things that you could do in an English class, so many good and worthwhile things. There's not enough time in the class to tackle every single thing. So something had to give. And so in most English classes, it was the writing skills. And so it's about helping you learn how to think critically about whatever pieces you're reading, maybe not so much about how to articulate those thoughts on paper, which is a challenge, you know? And that bleeds right into the second reason why I think writing is such an important skill for students to care about. When you know how to write well, that is just a tool in your toolbox to express yourself, to get your ideas out there, to get your opinions out there, because your voice matters. And if we have these writing skills, then you can communicate your thoughts and opinions with, minimal worry that you're going to be misunderstood, right? So if we have those tools in your pocket, that's just something that you get to use to really showcase who you are to the world, which is something that I think is an important thing to be doing at your age as a student, learning who you are and learning how to talk about that. So And honestly, I think that's this much more fulfilling reason to become a better writer is being able to articulate your thoughts, be able to express who you are in the world. So let's get into a little bit of the how, the nuts and bolts of our writing here. So whenever you sit down to do writing, it certainly doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen on accident. Whenever you get ready to write, it's important to know your goal, right? You want to think through what do you hope to accomplish with whatever it is you're writing. And maybe your teacher gives you a very specific goal when they give you the writing prompt, maybe they give you a rubric. But I think it's important to know that prose writing can really only accomplish a couple things. Prose writing can tell a story, explain something, or offer an opinion. And that's pretty much it, right? And in each of those categories, you've got some little subcategories that could constitute a story or constitute explaining something. Um, but once you know kind of what your goal is, you can kind of pick um, how you need to brainstorm it, right? Because we tell a story a little bit different from how we offer an opinion. Okay, we need a couple of different pieces to put those two different things together. Okay, so once you have your goal, we definitely have to sit down and do the brainstorming and pre-writing. Outside of Applerouth, I'm someone who writes regularly in terms of getting pieces published or I've written a book and all this kind of stuff. And I can tell you, like as a professional author, nobody writes the perfect draft the first time. Not even people who do this professionally. Um, Anything that's worth writing down needs to have some brainstorming and pre-writing go into it. Okay, there are lots of ways that we can explore brainstorming and pre-writing, um, and we're going to talk through several of them. This is certainly not indicative of all of the different brainstorming tools, but I tried to pick a nice variety of them that will hopefully speak to a variety of learning styles, right? Because we all think differently, we process information differently. So the goal here is to have some brainstorming techniques that speak to a couple different learning styles. Okay? So first thing is my go-to, which is free writing, which is basically you've got your idea in your head about what you want to write about, and you just write down everything that comes to mind about that topic. Right? It's almost like this stream of consciousness. Just get all of the ideas out of the brain onto the paper. We're not worried about order. We're not worried about structure. We're not worried about mechanics or anything like that. The idea is just to get it out of your head onto the page so you can see what ideas you have, right? Because when we have it written out, it's a little bit easier to see like what pieces could fit together, what the flow might look like, and that kind of stuff. And with this technique, I often find that I end up with more ideas than I could reasonably fit into whatever paper. That doesn't mean those ideas are bad. I might just put them in a different folder and save them for a different assignment, right? And only use what's super on topic to the paper at hand. I think this goes without saying that your free writing should not be your final draft because free writing starts out as chaos before it gets into something really beautiful at the end. Okay. So again, this is just about making sure we have some ideas on the page so you can see what ideas you have to work with. Um, so for some of you who are maybe more creative types, that's a really appealing um, brainstorming technique. But maybe you're sitting there thinking, I'm a much more linear thinker. I need structure. What other options are there for me? Don't worry, we've got you. So the journalist questions is a fantastic tool. So it's answering the who, what, when, where, and how of whatever you're writing about. So that gives you a very, very, very clear benchmark of what components you need to include. And the nice thing about this brainstorming technique is you can use it for a wide variety of writing styles. It doesn't just have to be, a journalist like news piece, right? This could be how you pre-write a story. Like who are your main characters? What's the conflict in the story? Where does it happen? When does it happen? And how do the events of that conflict unfold? Right? You could also use those same questions for a history essay, right? Who are the people involved in the event? What was the event? Where did the event happen? When did it happen? And how did those events unfold? So it's a way to like really make sure you're getting a holistic look at whatever thing you're writing about. And you can use it for tons of different things, not just like newsy type things. Okay. You can also use outlining. That's an oldie but a goodie. Whenever I do outlining, I like to make sure that each Roman numeral represents its own separate paragraph, and then I'll indent over and just kind of bullet point list out the talking points related to that main idea that I want to talk through. It's a great way to plan out what your paragraphs are going to look like. And if you're typing it, it's super easy to just copy something and move that block around, like move that whole Roman numeral around if you realize that certain ideas might flow better if you switch the order of them. So that's just a great way to kind of visualize what you're looking at there. So awesome. So we've got some stuff that's a bit more linear, and let's say that really spoke to you, but what about my visual learners in the room, right? Sometimes it's a lot easier for people to process information if we can make it visual and not just text-based. So we've got some ways that we can do that through concept mapping, okay? So concept mapping is about just putting the ideas that you have in relationship to each other on a page using more of a visual structure than just writing text. So we'll look at three different kinds: a T-graph, Venn diagram, and a bubble map. The first here is T-graph. It's great when you're planning out a comparison between two things or more than two things. Okay, so here we've got a T-graph. We're comparing a couple of Disney characters, Mickey and Donald. And you can see how those rows match up. Like that first row is what animal are they? That second row is what kind of clothes do they wear? That third row is what's their demeanor, right? And you can extend that by adding more columns. So let's say we wanted to add a column that included Goofy, right? So just to the right of Donald, I would draw another vertical line, extend that horizontal line, write Goofy up there. So then we would have rodent, fowl, dog, question mark. Because I saw a TikTok the other day that said Goofy's supposed to be a cow, and I'm like, in what universe is that a cow? But whatever. So rodent, fowl, dog, question mark. Then on our clothes category, no shirt, no pants, fully clothed. Then our demeanor category, friendly, grumpy, silly, right? So you can extend that however far you want to. It just kind of stops resembling a T once you do more than two items that you're comparing. It's a great way to visualize information, especially if you're doing a compare contrast piece. All right, so second up, we have a Venn diagram. So that's where you've got the two circles. The two circles represent two separate categories, and then where they overlap highlights the similarities between the two. So here we've got vampires as one, chocolate as another, and then where we see the intersection of vampires and chocolate is Count Chocula. So again, this is really great when you're doing a compare and contrast between two items. You can also add more circles, kind of like what we had at the very beginning of our time together when we were looking at Applerouth's Y, right? We had those three circles overlapped on each other. That was a three-circle Venn diagram. So you can, again, add more circles to this. I find that once you get past like three circles, it visually just looks kind of clunky. So I might avoid trying to use it for anything more than three compare contrast, but you do what works for you. Feel free to try it out and see if it works. And then last but not least here with our visual stuff is we have a bubble map. So the bubble map is great because it allows you to like draw connections between different ideas. So here in the middle, it looks like we're writing a paper about various automobiles that have existed. And then we've got the different little spokes coming off. And the nice thing about this is you can extend those, right? So if we look at the car bubble, you could add more little lines off that and you could indicate types of cars. You could have SUV, convertible, sports car, right? And just kind of keep making the web grow based off that. So you just want to make sure that whatever the main topic of your paper is pretty big and clear in the middle. Whenever I do a bubble map, that's like my biggest bubble is the main idea there. So yeah, lots of different ways that we can brainstorm and pre-write, and all of this is work that we have to do before we actually start writing. But it's a great way to get your thoughts organized, okay? When I'm reading student essays, I can usually tell which of my students did the brainstorming and pre-writing and which ones didn't, because the ones who did do the brainstorming and pre-writing, their essays come across as significantly more organized It's easier to follow the train of thought because they knew where they were going when they wrote it. So if you as a writer know where you're going when you are writing something, you can be pretty sure that your reader is going to be able to follow it. Okay. If you're not sure where you're going when you're writing something, your reader's not going to be able to follow that either, right? If you're not sure where you're going, how are they going to know? All right. So the brainstorming and pre-writing is a crucial step to the writing process that we don't want to overlook. So once we've got kind of the nuts and bolts of where we're going, we want to think about what's the end game? What should my reader get at the end of this? And again, maybe your teacher provides that for you in a little bit of a rubric, but maybe you've got a little bit more leeway there. So if you are doing a narrative, maybe you're writing a story for an English class or maybe taking a creative writing class, right? You want to think through what should my reader get at the end of this? Should they learn something? Should they feel a particular emotion? How do I, if I want them to feel a particular emotion, how do I get my reader there? Like what things am I going to need to include to get them to feel that emotion by the end? Um, Other things could be like analysis, right? Typically, when we're analyzing something, we're highlighting some important pieces of information about an event with the intent to maybe teach about it. So, like, what should the reader learn here, right? Or if we're doing an argument paper or persuasive essay, right? I can't think of many people who write an argument essay hoping that their reader won't agree with them at the end, right? Our goal is to persuade the reader to understand our point of view, perhaps even agree with our point of view. So, what are we trying to get them on board with, right? So, you want to be thinking about like, what's the end game? What am I going to get them toward? Okay. And then once we have that, we want to make sure that we're really leaning into making that clear structure. So if you're not entirely sure how to get started with that, a three-pronged thesis is a great way. It's a classic for a reason, but it's a great way to get started. So here I've got an example of a thesis for an essay on reducing pollution, okay, particularly related to microplastics. It says individually, we can help reduce microplastic pollution by purchasing reusable containers, supporting local agriculture, and making food at home. Okay, so here is that exact same prompt, and I've highlighted the three different prongs in different colors. So the blue one, the orange one, and the purple one. So three different topics, well, not topics, sorry, three different points that we're going to make about this topic of reducing microplastic pollution. And that kind of tailor makes itself for us to go ahead and structure a 5 paragraph essay where we've got our introduction with the thesis and then one paragraph for each of those three prongs, right? So we've got back, we've got our blue prong, our orange prong, our purple prong. Boom, we see those in our essay here, and then our conclusion there at the end, right? So this is definitely a great place to get started, right? If you're not entirely sure how to go about the organizational type things. And as you get more comfortable with your writing, there are certainly other things you can do to jazz that up a little bit, other organizational structures that you can use to make it engaging, especially if you're writing something longer than a 5 paragraph essay. But this is always a great place to start if you're just trying to see like what ideas you want to prioritize. Okay. And then when it comes to paragraph organization, especially if we're not doing that three-pronged thesis, um, it's very rarely an intuitive skill. You know, it's not something any of us come out of the womb knowing how to do, right? Um, and what I find to be true for a lot of my students is they're not entirely sure where to put those breaks if it's not kind of tailor made for them, like with that three pronged thesis. Okay. The rule of thumb that I like to give to my students is every new topic should be a new paragraph, right? Um, I'm not a big stickler for like a paragraph has to have a minimum number of sentences. For me, it's more about am I shifting to a new idea here, right? Because we don't want to end up with, a big wall of text where we've got one paragraph taking up an entire page. That's harder for your reader to read. It's harder for your reader to digest. putting those breaks in whenever you bring in a new topic just makes it easier for your reader to follow the train of your ideas, which makes it more likely that they're going to keep reading it and be engaged. Okay. So if like you're giving feedback to maybe a peer or something like that, a great way to give feedback is to let them know a paragraph is too long and ask them where do you feel like it's shifting to a new idea, right? So that way they can really start thinking through how the reader is thinking about their or about this piece. So then when we are structuring paragraphs, it's always a good idea to include effective transitions. Okay, so transitions allow us to diversify the structure of our sentences. And it also allows you to highlight what kind of connections you see between ideas, maybe the kind of connections you want your readers to see between different ideas. So we've got usually, there are lots of ways that we can use these, like at the beginning of a sentence or end of a sentence, um, but it links ideas together. Sometimes in a way that is like a cause and effect, sometimes in a way that's um, opposite, almost like what we see here with the but. But there are lots of words that you can use. So I definitely want to encourage you to maybe take a screenshot of this one, this slide here. This is not an exhaustive list of transition words, but it's a pretty robust list. um, and an exercise that I'll do with my students sometimes is if there is a particular, say, like contrast word that they use consistently, like I'm surprised the word however isn't on there. Um, so if they use however all of the time, I might ask them to take a look at this contrast list and say, okay, well, let's find a couple of places where we can use something other than however. I'm not saying you can't use however, we just don't want to use it every single time you make a contrast. Um, and so it really allows you to build your vocabulary a little bit more and to make it a little bit less repetitive for your reader. So definitely want to encourage you to take a screenshot of this real quick so that way you have that for your records and maybe play around with it this summer as you're working on some of your summer papers. And also like go in and look at your own writing and see if there are any transition words that you use maybe a little bit too often and see what kind of swaps you can make. All right, so we've gotten to the point where we've done our pre-writing, we've looked at our paragraph structures, we've looked at our thesis to make sure that it's strong, we've looked at our paragraph breaks, we've looked at our transition words, but that does not mean we are done once you have the thing finished. You know, like I mentioned earlier, even professionals, you know, we don't write the perfect thing the very first time. Like it's just not how it happens. We don't write things that end up being edit free. Okay. Um, so we want to make sure that when you're writing assignments for school, you build in time to look at it later. You know, like I usually suggest making sure that there's like a day between when you finish it, like day of nothing, and then a day where you revise it, just to give yourself a little bit of distance from it. So that way you come back to it, you can look at it with fresh eyes, see if it still makes sense to you. Because if you read something and you're like, I have no idea what I was thinking when I wrote that, I don't even know what that means, right? It's not going to be clear to your reader either, you know. So just taking a little bit of time to do that. And whenever you're doing revision, and especially if you're doing one of those assignments where, like, I don't know about you, but my teachers in high school were really big on having us do peer reviews where we would swap papers and like edit our friend's paper, and then give them their comments back, and we would get graded on how well we graded theirs, basically. um, it could be easy to fall into the trap of saying I have to point out every single thing that I think is wrong, um, and it's not a great uh, way to go about it, right? Because I don't know about you, but I don't like it whenever, or I didn't like it whenever a teacher handed me back a paper and she'd used so much red ink on it, right? It was like, dang, I must have really messed this up. It's not to say that the feedback wasn't helpful, but I think there's a way that we can give and receive feedback that's much more encouraging. Okay. So instead of trying to fix every little tiny thing, focus on a couple of specific things and work on growing those skills. So making sure you have a clear, relevant thesis, you're providing enough details, that you do have that good paragraph structure with your organization there. Um, Sentence variety and word precision, right? Making sure that we're using the best word to describe the thought that you're trying to communicate, not just using the same vocabulary over and over again. Okay. So, when we're providing feedback, it's also good to not just look at everything that somebody did wrong. You also want to highlight what they did well, right? Particularly if it's something that you know they've been working on. If you know that they've been working on developing a clearer thesis and you read something from them and the thesis is clear as day, let them know that, right? It's good to make sure that we highlight where the improvement is happening so that people know that the work that they are putting into making it better is helping, that it's worth it. Okay. Um, so I think it's important to keep that in mind too. Like, um, to critique something isn't just to highlight what's bad about it, but it's also to highlight what's good about it. Okay. So another thing that could be helpful, whenever you're giving feedback, whether you're a friend giving feedback to one of your other friends or a parent giving feedback to a student, I find it helpful if we're working for the long term. So kind of like focus on two specific things, especially if it's a student where like we're going to be doing some work together for a while and there are a lot of things that we can improve upon. So focus instead of highlighting every single thing that's wrong, focusing on one higher order skill and one lower order skill. So like a higher order skill would be like making sure that students are providing enough evidence to support the claims that they make, right? So like focusing on that and really making sure that we're getting that taken care of before moving on to another higher order skill. And then a lower order skill. So like maybe working on punctuation, maybe working on sentence variety, things like that. And as they get more comfortable with grammar usage or things like that, we can move on to another lower order skill. That makes it also a little bit more manageable as you, like the person giving the feedback and helping the student improve, makes it a little bit easier for you to keep track of what skills that particular student needs to work on. Okay. All right, and then now that we've got these tools together, we get to, well, how do we get better at writing? Um, and writing is just like any skill. Any skill. You have to practice. It is not an innate thing that we're able to do from the time we're born. It's something that we learn. It's something that we learn how to do. And it's something that we can get better at if we dedicate the time to practice, right? Because I love this comic because I feel like it highlights it so well, but you could really do it with any skill. You could do it with writing, you could do it with drawing, you could do it with playing basketball. Like, how are you so good at free throws? You know, it's like I'm not good at free throws because I don't go shoot free throws. If I wanted to get better at shooting free throws, I would need to go to a basketball court and practice. Writing is the same way. Okay, so I want to talk through some things that you can do even this summer to improve your writing, and hopefully in some ways that don't make it a drag, right? Like I know that summer is a time where we want to take time to relax, or maybe we want to make a little bit extra income doing a part-time job or doing some internships or what have you. Um, so the nice thing about writing is to improve at writing, it doesn't necessarily always have to be a super serious writing assignment. You can definitely imbue it with a little bit of fun. Okay. The important thing is to come at it though with what we call a growth mindset. So this is something that we are really big on here at Applerouth. From that idea at the beginning that we believe that if we can help students change their self-beliefs, we can change their lives, right? So a growth mindset views things like writing as a skill that I can improve upon with practice. A fixed mindset would say, I'm just not good at that. Like, I'm just not a math person. I'm just not a basketball person, right? Like, I'm just not good at it. So why try? Like, I'm just going to fail anyway. And so that leads to what we call a self fulfilling prophecy because you believe that you're not good at it, you don't practice. And then when you have to use that skill at some point in your life, um, you don't do well because you didn't practice it. But you don't attribute it to not practicing. It just comes back to, oh, I didn't do well in that because I'm just not a basketball person, right? And so we really want to try and help people move away from that. and view these different skills with more of a curiosity. So here we've got kind of like this split decision tree here. One side shows what happens if we approach darn, I made a mistake with a growth mindset. The other one highlights what happens when we approach it with a fixed mindset. So when we look at it from a growth mindset, we approach it with more curiosity. I made a mistake here. What can I learn from this? Um, that allows us to engage it in a way that's a little bit more low stakes, right? I made a mistake. It's not the end of the world. I made a mistake. It doesn't mean I'm terrible at this, right? It just means that maybe I need to look at it from a different angle. And the cool thing about this is the science behind it is fascinating, like the neuroscience. But doing this, like asking these kinds of questions, actively promotes the um, construction of new neuron paths in your brain, which is incredibly important for brain health. Like, first of all, but allows your brain to start doing more complex things, which is really cool if you think about it. With a fixed mindset, though, it just goes down the same path that it always goes down and more deeply entrenches those negative self beliefs. So, like, a growth mindset has a lot of positive benefits, not just in terms of like feeling good about ourselves, but like literally changing our brain chemistry, which is wild to me. Um, and it also leads to other kinds of growth academically, which I think is incredibly important. Um, so I think approaching these exercises with a growth mindset, if you plan to do them this summer, can be a big help. So when we're looking at growth, I think it's important to focus on the three R's. I hope you'll permit me the creative liberty there on the second R. So our three R's is a read, write, and revise. Okay. So one way that you can grow as a writer is to read stuff. If you want to be a good sci-fi writer, read good sci-fi. If you are working on poetry for a creative writing class, read some good poets, right? So like as we grow as writers, it's helpful to see what it looks like for someone to do that thing successfully. And so we can see like, what do we like about their style? What don't we like about their style? What would we do differently? And analyzing what they're doing just kind of highlights for us what's possible and also what we don't like. So we don't do that, right? So when you're reading, you should definitely think through some of these questions. It's a really active experience when you're reading for the sake of learning from the material, like learning as a writer from the material. So you can adapt these questions to whatever kind of text you're reading. So what are they trying to convince me of would be a question that we would ask if we're reading like an op-ed or a persuasive piece or something like this. Um, what sections were the hardest to follow? Like, was there a place that the author wasn't clear and what could have made it clearer, right? And just asking yourself these questions just allows you to think more critically about what you're reading and to see like, how would I have written this differently? What tools would I want to use here? Okay, so that's something that can be helpful. So promoting grade as a writer, our second R is to actually do the writing. You know, we don't get better at writing by not writing. So we've got to do it. So there are lots of prompts that you can use here, and there are so many cool resources available out there, even at places like Target or whatever. So I'll give you a couple of things that I find helpful to help with writing. So morning pages is basically a practice where like you do it 10 to 15 minutes first thing in the morning, um, like before you've even really woken up. It's just kind of about like getting the clutter out of your brain. It's all stream of conscious. The goal is just to write for 10 to 15 minutes straight, not picking up your pencil from the paper, and just write without an agenda, right? And you may come up with a really cool beginning of a story or like the beginning of a paper or something like that for school. But it's just a great way to kind of just like get the clutter out of your brain and start the day. Another writing exercise that you could do is to throw back to Twitter, old school Twitter. I mean, well before it was X. Um, Back when they limited your tweets to 180 characters. So you could practice, using that word precision we talked about earlier, by summarizing a chapter from your summer reading using only 180 characters. This is actually an assignment that a grad school teacher of mine had us do, and it is a lot harder than it sounds. But I'm forever thankful for that assignment because it helped me choose my words much more carefully and intentionally, which is something that I have taken with me as a writer since. So this is a fun one that you can do. See if you can summarize a chapter of a book in 180 characters or less, right? You can look at random images and write a story based off this. So, like here, we're surrounded by children who are staring at us. It's like, okay, well, why are they staring at us? Did something? Do I have something on my face? They're all wearing pretty old school clothes. Have I time traveled? Am I a kid or am I an adult here? Why is that kid on the right all pouty lipped? Are they sad? There are lots of questions that you can ask and develop a story off of this. And you can do that with any image that you find online, right? Or like maybe it's a TikTok that you're responding to and you're trying to figure out, well, what led them to create that video or what happened leading up to the event that got caught on video, right? So lots of things you can do with that. You could find some prompts, and I've got a few here. I know that Target has a lot of good writing journals where basically you open up a page and there's a prompt like this at the very top of it and a few vocab words that they encourage you to use in that piece that you write. And you can just write it out there. So here are a couple of prompts that you're welcome to use in your own writing experiences. There are also, you can just think through, do I agree with this idea or disagree with this idea? And kind of work through what it might look like to write a persuasive essay off that. These are all just like old school sayings, actions speak louder than words. Um, all good things come to those who wait. So just like one of those things that's like there's sayings that your parents always say, right? You can ask, well, wait a second, do I actually think that's true? Okay. And then I will say though, for any of my high school students who are here, maybe even some of my college students, if any of y'all are on, if possible though, to move past that like binary thinking, because for like younger students who are just starting to learn how to articulate their opinions, like a yes, no, this or that is a really fantastic way to start. But as we get into classes like AP Lang, for example, one of the things that the graders focus on in the student response essays for the AP Lang exam is this thing called sophistication. And in order to get the highest score in sophistication, student has to be able to recognize the complexity of an issue and to recognize that it's not just black and white. Okay, they have to recognize viewpoints outside of their own and lots of facets of that argument. So, for example, I took one of the things from the previous slide. All things come to those who wait. My response to that, if I were writing an essay on that, would be context. Context matters as to whether or not we should wait. For baking a cake, it's good to wait until it's finished baking. But during a race, I need to go when the ref says go. If I wait until after the ref says go, I'm going to lose that race, right? So thinking through things like that from a slightly more complex angle is really reflective of that critical thinking that high school students are expected to learn how to do when you start getting into those harder classes. And it's certainly the level of logic and reasoning that students are going to be expected to do when they get to college, right? So like moving past this just simple yes, no, I agree, I disagree, for our older students here, I think is really important in developing as a writer. Okay. Another thing that you could do is explain how to do something, and I think when I do this exercise with students, they're always surprised at how many steps something actually takes to do, right? And I think like, when we were in the peak of the pandemic, we saw all of these hand washing posters come up, right? And I don't know about you, but I was surprised to see that there were that many steps to washing my hands. It's not just grab soap, grab water, rub, and then you're done. But there were a lot of steps on all of those. So an exercise that you could do if you really wanted to make this fun, right, is get some friends together and pair people up. One of you writes the instructions or one person in the pair writes instructions for making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And then the other person in the pair has to follow those instructions as literally as possible. And whichever team has the cleanest looking, we'll say, PB&J will win that little competition that you do. And I've done that one a couple of times with folks, and you would be surprised just how messy it gets. Because again, there are always more steps to something than we actually think there are. Okay. But that's a way to make it a bit more fun. And even with these funner exercises, you definitely want to make sure that we're doing that third R, read, write, revise, to make sure that you are making improvement, right? Because while doing some of the sillier prompts can be really fun, we still want to make sure we're like hitting those marks of the things that we want to improve upon. So still make sure that you're getting the feedback on if it's clear, that there's a place where you can add more detail, there's a place where it's too clunky, a place where you need to add a paragraph break, all of that good stuff. And at the end of the day, though, when all else fails, um, it's important to just keep writing. You know, writing is a skill that you can always improve upon, no matter how long you've been doing it. You know, I've really enjoyed writing since I was in high school. I had a creative writing teacher who just changed my life, frankly, and set me on this trajectory of learning how to become a better writer. And even though it's a skill that I've been honing for a long time, I always have something that I can improve on, right? And so it's something that just continues to get better the more that you do it. Learn new things, you discover new things, you discover new words. And there's something just really beautiful and empowering about being able to find the right phrase to communicate what you're feeling and what you're thinking, in a way that other people get. You know, there's nothing quite like that in the world. Um, but you don't experience those moments unless you keep at it. Okay. All right. So we're going to move into a time of Q&A at this point. So if you got any questions, you go ahead and drop those in the chat. While you were putting those in the chat, though, I do want to go ahead and plug a couple of things. So if you're interested in growing as a writer, we have a writing curriculum here at Applerouth that I've used it with several students and absolutely love it. And it's adaptable for all kinds of ages. So you'll learn how to work through a couple of different styles of writing in terms of like doing memoir, doing analytical stuff, doing compare and contrast stuff. So all kinds of great things, as well as reviewing different grammar rules. Um, and so you can schedule it at your pace, and it's a one-on-one tutoring situation. So you get personalized feedback on what you write, which is absolutely fantastic. I also want to go ahead and plug real quick before we get to those questions, the executive function coaching that I mentioned earlier. So again, that was like that invisible syllabus of school, the things that come intuitively to some folks, but not as intuitively to others. If that's something that you're interested in, we would love to connect with you about that. You can see um, the phone number there at the bottom of the screen. If you also go to our website, there will be a link to the Calendly calendar. And you can just claim a time with one of our program directors there to learn more about what this executive coaching stuff is all about. All right, so I believe I saw a question come up in the chat, so we'll go ahead and take a look at that. Let's see here. This is interesting. I am attempting to pull it up, but when I click it, the question doesn't appear. Apologize for the technological issue here, folks. All right, awesome. We've got the question here. In what cases should we use second person when writing a POV, so point of view? That is a good question. So when we're talking about writing, you've got first, second, and third person. So first person would be like, I am doing the things, I write these things, I think these things, right? Third person would be like talking about people's names. Harry went to the store, Susan grabbed the milk, she was very unhappy, you know, whatever. Second person would be like you and we kind of stuff, right? And I think part of that depends on the nature of your assignment, right? If you're writing something that is very analytical, then you're probably going to refrain from saying you to your audience because they're not the topic of whatever you're writing about, right? If you're doing an analysis on something in the news, you're talking about that event, right? So saying you do this, you do that wouldn't be appropriate. Um, I certainly think it would be appropriate if you're doing a story wherein part of the structure of your story is to break that fourth wall and talk to your reader. Um, but yeah, so in terms of other topics, I think it kind of depends on what the assignment itself is, because it'll it'll be kind of like up to your teacher at that point. Because again, like there aren't many cases I think where it's appropriate to do that. Because if you're writing a history paper, again, your focus is the um, goodness, your subject is whatever that historical event is. Right. Right. Awesome. Thank you so much for that question. Looks like we've got a couple more. Um, and I'm still having that issue where I can't see the question. Um, all right. So what about your claim and statement of your paragraph? All right. So that's a question about paragraph structure, it sounds like. Um, so whenever you're structuring a paragraph, I like to try and keep it nice and tight. One main claim in a paragraph, and then all of the rest of the pieces of that paragraph being your supporting evidence. So, for an example, I'll throw out, I don't know why PB&J is just on the mind tonight. So if I make the claim that crunchy peanut butter is the best peanut butter, right? Like if I'm talking about the components of making a good PB&J, that would be a claim for one of my paragraphs. And then every other piece of that paragraph would relate to crunchy peanut butter, but all of it would be evidence highlighting why crunchy peanut butter is the best. It provides um, good texture in the sandwich. It gives you a little bit more protein because there are actual nuts in there, or whatever. So all of those pieces of supporting evidence will still be topically related, but it's about proving that claim. Okay, if a good piece of advice I give to students for that is if you make a statement in a paper and you can ask the question how or why to that statement and you don't have an answer written down, then you haven't explained it enough. If I say that crunchy peanut butter is best and that's it, I can say, well, why is it the best? I haven't included my why, so I have to go back and add those pieces. All right, awesome. Looks like we've got another question. And I'm just want to say shout out to my behind the scenes tech person who's sending me all these questions in the chat because I have no idea what's going on in my Q&A. So how do you structure, or how would you structure a good essay? If you're not sure where to start, I would definitely recommend with the 5-paragraph essay with the 3 piece thesis that we talked about earlier. That gives you a good place to start, a very clear organizational structure, and it kind of gives you a sense of like, I know that I need to talk about 3 points related to this topic, right? So that is a place to start for sure. So if you are working on a paper and you're not entirely sure how to start it, I would start there. All right. Awesome. Well, I think that's all of our questions. I just want to say thank you or oh, we have one more question. Do you guys do Shazat prep? Yes, we do. I don't do it, but we have plenty of tutors in our New York market who do. So if you take a look at our contact information below, like if you want to shoot a quick email over to info@applerouth.com, and then we can get you connected to one of our program directors to talk a little bit about what the Shazat prep looks like. All right, cool. Well, I don't want to jinx it, but I think that's all of our questions. I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. I do want to be respectful of your time because I know it is sacred summertime, and don't want to hold you longer on a school thing or on a school thing than you would rather be doing on a summer evening. But thank you all so much for coming. Again, if you want to learn more about what we have going on here at Applerouth, you can email info@applerouth.com, or you can go to our website and connect with one of our program directors on their Calendly, schedule a time with them to talk with them, ask some questions. But thank you all so much for coming. Hope you have a lovely evening, and we'll see you around.